The Open Therapy Institute is addressing bias in mental health care. Go to our website, opentherapyinstitute.org. We have CE credit workshops about overlooked issues in the field. You can go to our workshop page and register now and become a member. And for those looking for a therapist, we match people with someone who's highly skilled and truly open. Just contact us through the contact page on the website or email us at info@opentherapyinstitute.org. Hi, I'm Leslie Elliott Boyce from the Radical Center.
And I'm Andrew Hartz from the Open Therapy Institute. Today, we have a different topic related to our political season. I was talking to you, Leslie, about the idea of American civil religion and imagined community. And it sounds, it's maybe more of a socio-political topic, but I think it's actually really important to people psychologically. And it shows something about how people relate to their nation and why they relate to it the way they do that I think is often missed. So American civil religion is kind of like an academic concept, and it refers to all of the rituals, symbols, idioms related to cultivating an American community. And so it definitely involves like landmarks like the Washington Monument or the Lincoln Memorial, who's on the currency, the founding myths, if it's George Washington and the cherry tree, or the Constitution, the White House. But it's also, the flag, the anthem, the pledge. It's the holidays. I'd say the most important ones tend to be Thanksgiving and the 4th of July. Thanksgiving is kind of like when the American model is played out in an intimate family setting, and the 4th of July tends to be a larger communal setting. But there's others. There's Veterans Day and Memorial Day and President's Day. And these are times when we honor, figures or events in our national history. And so people have incredibly strong feelings about these things. I think a lot in the modern era, a lot of times people think, well, these are just symbols, these are just rituals. It's no big deal. They don't mean anything, but they actually serve this really important function of creating a sense of shared community among Americans. There was what was his name? There was a famous political philosopher who defined a nation as an imagined community. And I can't remember what his name was, but it was he wrote a book on it. I think it was called Imagined Communities. And it was like when nation states were emerging, especially in the 19th century in Europe, there was this move to democracy and self-rule. And so one of the first questions you have is, well, who's ruling? Like if the community is ruling, who's the community? And it was really understood very soon that had to be a nation. It's a group of people that imagines themselves to be a people. It's such a psychological thing. And you can see how when democracy spread, then the nation state spread along with it. And these are state governments that are defined by representing a people who imagine themselves to be a people. Mm-hmm. And the map of Europe was totally carved up as the empires fell and nation states emerged. I mean, if you look at a map of like the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and it turned into 30 countries or whatever it is now, and it's based on the different communities that saw themselves as separate peoples. Mm-hmm. And it's almost like you can't be a nation unless you have that sense of a shared identity, because that's what you're voting on. You're voting on the history and future of your people, and you're coming together, make that decision as a people. If you're not, the danger is that just the different subgroups just vie for power and they fight, and it doesn't work. So in order for democracy to work, you have to have peoplehood. So just to say, not to beat a dead horse, but the French Revolution slogan was liberté, égalité, fraternité. And fraternité is about brotherhood, and it means the French people are a brotherhood, they're a people, and that enables them to set up the institutions that allow them to have self-rule. And in the United States, unlike other countries, we don't have the same, everybody practices the same religion or has the same ethnicity or even speaks the same language. So the civil religion becomes really important in the American context. And if you lose it, you actually, I think, do experience a fragmenting of, well, I don't know who we are. Like if we just took the flag and changed it, I think that would actually be more psychologically impactful than people might think. Or if we just change the anthem and we just got rid of 4th of July, turned it into something else, it actually does change things. And who's on the currency and why. It does change the sense of national character and national identity. And I guess part of why I'm thinking about this is because there are so many threats to the symbols that kind of keep American society held together right now. And at the same time that there is an ever increasing emphasis on things that divide the country. So, one example might be citizenship. What is it that makes an American? If it's not race, not ethnicity, not religion, it's actually not even, you don't have to believe in the Constitution. You don't have to like the founding fathers. You don't have to like the holidays or the flag or the anthem or the monuments or the memorials or any of the mythology. You don't have to like the pilgrims. You don't have to like anything. So what is it? It's not even citizenship. Because you can come as a non-citizen, and according to a lot of influential people, you're just as American as somebody who came, whose ancestors have lived here for hundreds of years. And at the same time that something like citizenship is being weakened and means less and less, and anything that could tie us together, like the shared rituals, are dissolving and they're contested. Thanksgiving is incredibly contested and challenged. Really, all of the symbols of American civil liberty are being challenged in a very direct way right now. And at the same time, what's being emphasized more than anything else is race. If you're a non-citizen, you can still get a lot of the same perks depending on where you live. You can get a lot of the same perks of citizenship. But if you're a different race, that's something that actually will impact where you can get into school and where you get hired and what scholarships you might be able to get and stuff like that. So all of the stuff that divides us is being really overemphasized at the same time as the stuff that could unite us. This civil religion is being weakened. And I think that there's a real danger of fragmentation as if it sinks in that the American flag doesn't mean what it used to anymore, and it's actually just a symbol of a subsection of the United States, and the larger country doesn't honor it, and they don't honor Thanksgiving, and maybe they want to cancel Thanksgiving, they want to cancel other holidays, President's Day they don't like, or whatever, Columbus Day or something like they're all being challenged. There is this kind of risk of national fragmentation. And the thing that's the last thing I'll just say is the thing that's really tragic to me about this project is that a lot of these symbols are so innocuous that it's what do you have to lose by just standing for the anthem, or for example, or honoring the flag? Actually, you don't lose anything. And to me, of saying it's a pretty ambiguous symbol and it doesn't symbolize much more than national unity, honestly. But if it gets labeled as something that's racist and therefore divisive and used in a divisive way where some people stand and some people kneel, it doesn't take much of that for it to totally lose, excuse me, to totally lose its ability to function as a unifying symbol. And you already see that where some people say Columbus Day, some people say Indigenous Peoples Day, and some people don't like Thanksgiving and some people do. And some people want to tear down the monuments or change who's on the currency or whatever. And so I think, but I think it seems to be maybe underestimated, especially in the intellectual class, like how momentous these symbols are and how powerful their effect on people could be.
Yeah, I think that's really fascinating. I wonder about that, the destruction of symbols. And, in my lifetime, I guess, so I don't know what the spirit of national unity would have been like prior to my life, because I don't have a sense of that. I guess I have some sense that we did, and there was a big swell of national unity after World War II, during and after World War II, and then somehow I guess that maybe tapered off, and during the 60s, I'm not sure what that was like, but I was born in the mid 70s, and growing up, I didn't really have a strong sense of Americanism or American pride. I didn't. In fact, I thought, looking back now, I wonder how much my education was really focused on kind of downplaying that. Like I can remember lots of stories about slavery, for instance, and gosh, we were so bad, and how we involved ourselves in foreign wars, and there was this sense that being an American was being this gauche, big, blundering thing that was kind of selfish and kind of looked down upon by the rest of the world. So I didn't have a strong sense of American pride, and I didn't see those symbols as nearly as meaningful as I can now at this point look back and see that they are and could be. Things like the flag or the national holidays, they seemed very commercial to me. They seemed like they were more marketing symbols, like we were trying to drum up some sort of sense of Americanism in order to sell product, and not like they had inherent meaning. And now on this side of things, over the past several years, we started to see like the people coming out and saying that the American flag is a symbol of white supremacy, things like that. Like the flag, it's the flag, and it stands for so much, and you can criticize it. It's used for commercialism or whatever, but it certainly stands for a whole lot more than just that one epoch in American history. And so I have grown a little more reverent of some of these traditions and symbols over my lifetime. That's just my own personal perspective, I suppose. But like Thanksgiving and the 4th of July are now things that I feel like I celebrate and want to hold on to more. Perhaps I'm reacting to this progressive current of destroying everything, and I'm wanting to hold on to some sense of tradition. But also, I think that there seems to be two national religions, really. We've got the religion of DEI, which is quickly becoming every training that people go to, anybody who's employed in a school system, anybody who's employed by the government in any capacity, they're doing so many of these DEI trainings. You have to sit through constant sensitivity trainings and DEI trainings and compulsory compliance, information sessions. That there's this, I'm seeing this grow up as a strong wave of American civil religion. And I wonder if that religious impulse is just something that's very natural to us, if also part of the reason why we've glommed onto, we've got the conservatives holding onto the flag and the Thanksgiving, and the progressives holding onto the DEI and the queering and the pride flags and stuff. And I wonder if it's just a response to us losing some sort of religious impulse that is celebrated in a more traditionally religious way. We're turning nationalism or identity into a religion, rather, because we're in lieu of this other thing that we would have traditionally celebrated.
Yeah, I mean, I think to have a nation, you've got to have a civil religion. And this is actually like it's actually really foundational. There's a really famous like social sociologist, Emil Durkheim, who has like famous book in religious studies is Elementary Forms of Religious Life. And he outlines like how in like, what he calls primitive societies, they'd have these rituals where maybe they sacrifice an animal or they do something around a fire or they have some type of ritual and they create this trance-like state and people take on different roles and it creates these ideas of like sacred versus profane, in-group versus out-group, different hierarchies that are structured, the worldview, the reality, like that stuff comes out of the ritual. The ritual is what sets the reality for the community. And it's this sense of, okay, we're a tribe now because we did the ritual. So it's actually like, this is really different from maybe Marxist thinkers who would say the powerful people got power and they invented religion, the civil religions, to like control the masses. And the religion is secondary. Like Durkheim says, it's the other way around. The religion is primary and the hierarchy is secondary, or whatever. But I think it's just serving this really, really big function in terms of orienting people to like, who are we? What are our values? How do we relate to each other? And I think you're right. Like, I think that's when I grew up, I had no appreciation for this, zero. And I think partly it wasn't under any threat, so I took it all for granted. But I didn't really know what function it was serving. But some little things can have a huge, huge impact. I mean, the Black national anthem that's being played in front of football games or something like that, that is a huge, to me, that's very, very important because it's signaling to at least a lot of people that Black people are a separate nation. And that's why they have a separate national anthem. And now we're kind of not a one nation state. We're like a binational state or maybe a multinational state. And the different nations are the races. If that sinks in psychologically, that's a sea change. And I think it really sets in motion a lot of processes that could ultimately fragment the country. But I think you're right. People have no, like, another one would be like, another example, like kneeling during the anthem is a really like great like example of like one where the people who kneeled for the most part said, this isn't about trying to insult the United States. It's about raising awareness about racism. But they were disrespecting a sacred national symbol in order to raise that awareness. And I think that other meaning was absolutely active of it having aggression towards the national symbol. Another example would be putting Harriet Tubman on the $10 bill or $20 bill.
Is that being proposed?
People were proposing it at a time.
Interesting.
I think it's been tabled, but I wouldn't be surprised if it came back. And I think the problem that I see with what, to me, putting Harriet Tubman on the 20 would be saying the official religion of America is DEI. They can say, she was an important American and we want to honor her. And that's all this is. But I think most people would say, no, we know she's picked because she's a Black woman. And this is identity politics coming for the currency. And it's a symbol that your race and your gender are the most important determinants of who should be on the currency, as opposed. I don't know that there's an argument that, did Harriet Tubman do more for the United States than FDR? Did she do more for the United States than, other people that aren't on currency? I don't know. Did she, there's no way she did more than FDR. Like, he won World War II and but FDR is not going to be on the 20, and because he's a white male. And so I think that these symbols have these multiple meanings that they communicate. And there's sometimes competing meanings or even meanings that are at odds with each other, but they really do have this massive impact. And I think people should be more mindful of these symbols and their essential role. You can't always just kind of constantly recreate them and constantly say, okay, well, we're just going to like call Thanksgiving something different and move it 2 weeks earlier. It's like, now it's not Thanksgiving anymore. Like I think I'm worried that people are underestimating the power of these things.
With gosh, so many things. This is a really great topic. Harriet Tubman, I think I would be happy to see her honored on some kind of currency. I would be happy to see, we did the Sacagawea dollar, the mint came out with that. I would be happy to see her honored in that kind of a way, because I think she was one of my early heroes, learning that story about the Underground Railroad when I was a little kid. I grew up really looking up to her, and I could see that kind of bravery, that kind of putting your life on the line is that's a cool thing to uphold, but I wouldn't displace someone off of the currency to replace them with her.
Well, it all depends on how it's being done and how it's like, I didn't have any issues with the Sacagawea dollar when it happened. And it didn't even really occur to me. And I didn't think it was so much, maybe it was more of an identity politics choice than it felt like, but I think it probably was. But like, I think now in the DEI era, to see that taking over the currency, that's what it means now. In my mind, that's what it means now. And it's sad, because maybe there are other contexts in which honoring her as a great American, as a symbol of national unity, I wouldn't react that way. But knowing, as I do now, the ideology that would animate that decision, I think it would just rankle me.
It seems so cynical, doesn't it? And it's the thing you were speaking to recently when we were talking about this. I saw after that conversation that we had about how putting race first, it creates these racial constructs that are in all of our minds, to where we're forced to think about it and grapple with it in this very cynical way, instead of in a more organic way, like we might have done prior to the DEI religion. And someone, I don't know if it was a comment on that video or if I just saw it somewhere else, but I saw recently someone made the statement, Morgan Freeman, we had a black man playing God in a movie. Is a Jim Carrey movie. I can't remember the name of it. It was a really good movie. We had a black guy play God in a movie some years ago, and it was no big deal. It was like, well,
nobody noticed.
It's a great role, and he's a great actor, and it was no big deal. But now it feels like it's also intentional, that it's like this displacement of other things. Like you're talking about the kneeling. It's a direct confrontation to traditional perspectives in order to supplant. And so that supplanting feels very forced. And so it gets people defensive or primed to reject it, because it doesn't feel like it's coming from a place of, we would just want to honor this person. It feels like it's by committee, by DEI decree that.
Well, and that we want to live together in unity as one people, ultimately. That's not what it means. It's actually like, we want these separations to be intensified, and you'll never understand their experience, and they should be proud, and you need to be ashamed, and we're going to discriminate, and these are quotas, and you need, it's like there's this whole censorship, indoctrination, aggression, separation, like ideology behind it that I think has totally disoriented. Whereas and I think probably for Morgan Freeman too, he didn't think, oh, good, I'm going to play a black god and I'm good, this is a win for black people. Like, he doesn't think that way. I don't think he thinks that way, and that comes through in his performance. And maybe they could cast it and script it with a different actor, and it would resonate as like something that had a lot of racial hostility in it. But it doesn't need to.
That fragmentation that you're talking about, one of the things that I wondered when you were saying that, you talked about how we get these racial divisions, kind of like the Black National Anthem and then the Star Spangled Banner. And, we have this, as you called it, fragmentation. Well, one thing I wonder is the United States just too big to hold one national identity for very long. I've wondered about that for a long time. I mean, you've lived all over the country, I think, or at least in a couple of different parts of the country. I've lived in a couple of different parts of the country. I'm from Texas. I live in the Pacific Northwest now. There's such a different feeling when you move around the country. We have shared culture for sure, but we also have very different character in different parts of the country. And it is truly huge. And I wonder if some of this fragmentation is a, is sort of an inevitable response to, if you try to have something shared over too vast an area or too vast a people, does it start to become watered down, meaningless, and feel commercial, like that thing that, I talked about my sense of it was? And is this sort of a natural social evolution towards tribalism, because too much scale sort of defeats the beautiful feeling of connection that people have when they do have a sense of shared community and unity?
Yeah. Well, I definitely think like people take for granted how hard it is to have like a large multicultural democracy that functions well. I kind of like it's really shocking to look back at like the incredible, I don't know if it's like hubris, it's this incredible arrogance to think that like we can have a radically diverse country where immigrants don't assimilate, maintain separate cultures, don't even necessarily learn the language, like, and that we have a, well-functioning, you know, multicultural democracy with 350 million people. I mean, if you look back at like the founding fathers, they thought their little, much more homogenous country, at least among the voting population, but I mean, and even not, is like much more homogenous and smaller.
Mm-hmm.
And they were terrified of subtle fragmentations, like is Delaware and Maryland, are they going to stick together? It's like, and they had a sense that this was an incredibly fragile thing. And it depended more than, no matter how good the Constitution was, it depended on a culture of people like behaving in a particular, like the stuff that you can't legislate about: fair dealing, fair rules, fair play, participation, local governments, all that stuff. It depended on the people, and on like a sense of like shared national interest. And the idea that now people seem to not think about, they think that thinking about national interest or a shared national culture is wrong. And even the fairly trivial symbols that can foster it are being explicitly undermined, where all the differences among the population are getting constantly amped up. That to me is a recipe for fragmentation. I don't think people are as scared as they should be for like, democracies don't always succeed. Multicultural democracy, like radically diverse multicultural democracies, don't exist.
Mm-hmm.
Like we're the closest thing that's to it ever being tried. There is no guarantee of success.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just shocking how flippant people are about like easy things, like some holidays and some songs that are fairly ambiguous anyway, are being like, these little things that could tie us together are being destroyed, when it's like the flag can mean whatever you want it to mean. Like it doesn't have to, like you can say it's about white supremacy, or you could say it's not, like it's about freedom. Why can't it be about freedom? But like, so I don't know. I think people, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about this is I think people need to be more mindful about like how difficult it is to maintain a coherent nation, and how much things like the community thing is actually, this is a point I didn't make, which I should have made, which is like, I don't ever hear people talk about the national community. I hear people talk about the LGBT community, the Black community, the undocumented community, everybody has a community, but we accept the nation. And I think people are being very careless about if these psychological patterns get entrenched and people really start to say, my community is this community, not the national community. That's going to set things up for fragmentation that'll be incredibly, I think, destructive and difficult for all of us to go through.
Mm-hmm. And you do think that it's possible to hold in one's mind a sense of American community?
I think people have done it in the past. I think it's getting harder and harder to have that. And I think it gets harder and harder the more there's no the less of those people, like when immigrants came to the US, big waves of immigrants in the late 19th, early 20th century, and there was such a desire on most of them, incredible gratitude for this country, and idealization of the United States, and a really strong desire to assimilate that were very common. And most did. And even with all those things, it's kind of miraculous how many different types of people were able to live in the same country and that succeeded. I think there were economic things that made it work, and there was something about the size of the land and lots of things that ended up making it work. But it's kind of like but there is no guarantee that I think that paradigm will continue. But it definitely won't work if people don't even want to try to make it work. It's like there's no hope if people aren't even trying.
Yeah, it's I'm reflecting so much as we're having this conversation on how relatively anti-American my upbringing felt. My education, the way that we were presented with the image of what it was to be an American through the public school system, at least when I was going through it in the 80s and early 90s, was very, it really presented a negative image. And I think that I felt a sense of being encouraged to look down on Americanism. So that's really fascinating.
I remember, I'll tell you when this really hit home for me. There's a couple of memories that I had. One of them was I was in Paris, and I was in front of the Musée d'Orsay, or one of these famous museums in Paris, and they had statues out front of Jefferson, Washington, Franklin.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, wow, like they're honoring our people in such a central, important place in France. That's so interesting. And you're realizing like these were really revered figures. And I remember another time I was reading about one of the nationalist leaders in China who kind of fought for Chinese nationalism. And it was saying like his hero that he was modeling himself off of was George Washington. And it's just interesting to think about like the Chinese Revolution being inspired by George Washington. And I didn't recognize that the American Revolution and the American Constitution was a global event that inspired people around the world and changed the way people were governed and ruled themselves around the world. And that people revered their ability to lead a people into freedom and to create these democratic institutions that worked. That this was the American Revolution was probably the most important revolution that's happened in the history of the world. And it's a global event that people around the world looked to and tried to replicate and admired. And I just think like, instead of why we're not taught that, and instead we're taught they were all hypocritic white male slave owners who didn't want to pay taxes or something. So false. It's
like, I'm thinking about Yuri Bezmenov. I don't know if you're familiar with him. I think
a little bit, yeah.
Yeah, the demoralization of a culture and the slow takeover of a culture. It's that's really fascinating. Yeah, because there's been a real, you could almost just point to a systematic demoralization of the American character.
That's not warranted. That's like, it's actually like, it's one of the most important, impressive achievements of American society were the political achievements related to the Constitution and the Revolution. And the idea that how much American history do we get and people don't know this? It's kind of stunning that they could
just leave out all the good parts and tell us the bad.
It's been more influential. I think the French Revolution was inspired by it. The
Mhm.
Russian Revolution in part was inspired by it too. But those were both kind of like failed revolutions that ended up in pretty bad places.
Mhm.
You know, I think the American Revolution is the most important, inspiring revolution in the history of the world. And it's like, and how many leaders around the world looked to them and admired them. And
Mhm. Yeah, what's that quote about a republic if you can keep it.
right.
I don't remember the quote, or somebody's going to come into the comments and remind me, but
Well,
yeah.
and the eye, people have to keep their eye on some of the small stuff too,
Mhm.
because these symbols and rituals and being a community, it's not hokey, cheesy, pointless stuff. It's so psychologically meaningful.
Mhm.
And if we lose it, we're going to recognize like it's actually like a huge shift in consciousness that'll really, I think, have a major impact. And maybe a lot of that's already happened, but I don't think
Mhm.
it's irreversible yet.
No, I think it's really important. I think that this topic is really important, and I think that we do take for granted a lot of the positives and a lot of the meaning behind the symbols that we share. And I think it's hitting home for a lot of people as we watch American flags replaced by Pride Progress flags on
Right,
public
right.
buildings. And I really do have a sense that people over the last several years, there's been a renewed investment in some of those symbols and traditions in some segments of society. I hope we continue to see more of that. And thanks for bringing this up in this way. It's been a really interesting conversation.
Thanks, Leslie. Great talking.